Hey there, my friend, my drummer friend. Well, let me turn my snares off real quick here. How are you doing? In case you couldn't tell, I'm sitting behind my drum kit. That's why I had to turn my snares off. My name is Daniel. This is Drummer Daily. I'm so glad you could join me for another episode of this podcast. So I got an email, or maybe it was a Facebook message, from someone not too long ago. And we were messaging back and forth about a few things, but then he asked me a question. He said, hey, do you ever deal with, or have you ever dealt with anxiety as it relates to your playing? And so I thought that would be a good topic to talk about today here on the podcast. And before I start, first things first, I told this person that I would not, share their name or their information, because, anxiety can kind of be a sensitive topic to talk about. So I promised him that I wouldn't share his info, but thank you for your question. I appreciate it. So I hope you get to hear this podcast episode. And the second thing about this is that it's interesting to me that, this is episode number 220 of Drummer Daily. So we're more than 200 episodes into this thing, and I'm still discovering topics that I've not covered. I haven't covered anxiety because I realized that I personally, well, maybe it's not true, but as far as I can remember, I never really have dealt with nervousness or anxiety directly around my playing of the drums or performing with the drums or anything like that. I have dealt with anxiety about some other things to do with drumming that I'll tell you about in a minute, and we'll get there. But just before I get started talking about this topic, I do want to encourage you, because like I mentioned, we're more than 200 episodes into this podcast, and I'm still discovering there are things that we haven't talked about on this podcast. So I would encourage you to, if you want to hear me talk about something or would like to hear my perspective on something, send me an email, daniel@danielhadaway.com, and I will do my best to work it in to an upcoming episode of Drummer Daily. All right, so anxiety. Like I mentioned before, when it used to be when people would say, hey, do you get nervous about playing, or do you have anxiety about playing drums? I would say no. And that's the honest truth. I don't actually I can't really recall a time, even when I was really young, when I felt anxious or nervous about the actual sitting down at the drum kit at showtime and playing the drums. It's just not something that happens. I will say that maybe there's some kind of weird repressed emotion. Maybe subconsciously I do feel nervous or anxious, because I will tell you that I have this interesting quirk about me that I notice this especially when I'm on tour. So maybe it's just that it's like that you get used to a routine, and so you don't feel nervous around the routine, but your body's deep down inside somewhere does feel nervous. I actually, before a lot of shows, right before I go on stage, will actually start to feel really sleepy, really, really tired. Not like I can't, I can't drag myself, up on stage, but more like, hey, in that moment I think, man, if I sat still for a few minutes and closed my eyes, I could definitely fall asleep sitting upright right now. And maybe that also has to do with, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it is just because drumming is kind of my happy place. And it's so comfortable to me. That's my home. That's where I want to be. And so maybe my body's like, oh, I can finally relax because I'm doing something that's familiar to me. I don't know. But all that to say, I don't have conscious feelings of anxiety around drumming itself, but I actually have dealt with anxiety about other things that are kind of related to drumming. And so I thought I'd share that with you today. I don't know if I've ever shared on the podcast, or if I have, it's been a long time since it's come up, that I actually have a chronic illness. It's called ulcerative colitis. And I won't get into all the crazy details about what that is. It's a digestive chronic illness, the digestive tract, and it can cause a lot of crazy symptoms that are not pleasant. And the craziest thing about it is that it's kind of like some other inflammatory diseases, in that your body can go through what are called flare-ups, which means it's not like you just get sick, for a week or for a day or two and then you get better. Flare-ups are like these prolonged periods of time where for sometimes months on end, you feel terrible pretty much every day. And the nature of this illness is that you normally want to be very close to a bathroom all of the time. And so as that relates to my drumming, I will tell you that with this illness, especially in the middle of a flare-up, I am determined to not let that illness take away from my dreams, my quality of life as best I can. There are times when, of course, it kind of knocks me off my feet, and so I have to take a break. But when it comes to things like touring or agreeing to play shows, I don't let that factor into it. So what that has meant is that a few tours that I've been on, of course I haven't toured in a while now, but a couple of years ago, I was in the middle of some pretty terrible symptoms and flare-ups right when it came time to tour. And so I didn't have anxiety about playing the drums, but I had anxiety about being on a tour bus and living the touring lifestyle in the middle of having all of these symptoms. And all of that is anxiety. That's a form of, what if this happens? What if that happens? Can I handle this? I'm not prepared to handle this. I can't do this. Those kinds of feelings. And there were a few days on those tours when I was feeling especially bad, and there were times when we had to delay the start of the show a little bit for my sake, or I was really anxious about going on stage, not because of my playing, but because of the symptoms and the illness that I was feeling along with that. And so while it wasn't related to the actual drumming, it's still an anxiety about going on stage that I felt. And so with all of that in mind, I'll tell you what I did that kind of helped me through that, and even helps me. This is not just about feeling anxiety. I think this is something that you can do that will help you deal with whether it's your drumming, or even if you have a lack of motivation to practice, anything where your mentality is becoming a block to you getting that thing done that you want to do. So whether you're nervous about playing drums, or you're just feeling lazy and you don't want to practice and it's hard to get yourself up and over to the drum kit or whatever it is, I'm going to tell you the same thing to address that as a place to start. And also, of course, I want to say I'm not a mental health professional or anything like that, and mental health is a huge thing. I know a lot of people are realizing that's something that we as a society don't focus on enough, and so definitely seek out professional help there if you need it. There's no shame in seeking out help. Just like if you're sick, you go to the doctor. If you're having mental health problems or things that you want to work through, seek out help. You can get that help. So don't just expect this podcast to fix the problems any more than me telling you something over a podcast would fix if you have a cold or something like that. Okay, so here's what I do. The first thing I do is whether I'm nervous about something or anxious about playing, or I'm just lacking motivation, I do the same thing, and I'll use an example. I'm lacking my motivation today even to record this podcast, but I know that I need to do it, and so I'm like, I got to end up doing this podcast, but I'm just lacking the motivation to even get started. So what do I do? So what I do is this. The first thing is I take a step back and I ask myself, is the ultimate thing that I'm going after, is this thing that I want to do, is this a good, healthy, is this the right decision? Is this my dream? Is this what I feel like I'm called to do? Is this the right thing for me to do? Big picture, outside of how I feel, is this the right thing to do? And my answer about drumming, of course, is yes, this is what I'm called. This is what I'm meant to do. Second thing is this podcast. Right now, I feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is a good healthy thing for me to do is record this podcast to help others. This is something I feel called to do, is to help other drummers. This is part of who I am. So recording a podcast or playing drums in this example, whatever it is, that is a good thing to do. So that's the filter is, of course, if something's not healthy for you at this moment to do, you don't need to try to motivate yourself to do it. You maybe shouldn't do it. Same thing with drumming when I was ill. Going on this tour ultimately is the right choice to make, and it's the right thing to make. And I don't think long term it's unhealthy for me to go on this tour. It might be difficult, but it's not unhealthy. So if that is the case, here's what I do. And this is actually the same thing I teach people in all of my classes and all of my coaching as far as becoming a professional drummer. Except for this is even a little easier. It is this. I don't focus on the fact that I need to record a podcast, or that I'm gonna have to go do this big tour, that I have to go play this show that I'm nervous about, or whatever it is. I can't focus on that because that will feel too daunting and I'll never get started out. I'll be paralyzed with the fear and anxiety about it. So what I do is I say, I know that I'm going to get there, but I know that there are steps that I have to take before I get there. So in the case of recording this podcast, I knew that I wanted to record this podcast in my third floor studio where my drums and everything are set up. So the first step for me was I knew that I needed to get my microphone that I plug into my iPhone that I record this podcast with. So I literally just get up, and whether I don't think about anything else, I'm like, just move your feet, just go through the motions of getting that microphone and plug it in. Okay, next thing is put your phone on airplane mode so no one calls and interrupts your recording. So I do that. And then I just walk up the first flight of stairs to the second floor of my house. And then I go around the hallway, and I basically, again, I just go through all the motions of getting to the point when I am there in the situation to do it. So you don't think about necessarily, you block out the feeling of what if. You know there are concrete things you can do to move yourself that direction, and then you worry about what's right in front of you to get to the next step. And so that's what I did. In that, like I said, that works for lack of motivation or anxiety, nerves, anything like that. It's just focus on what's right in front of you and what you need to do. Assuming that what you're choosing to do is healthy and right and good and it's the right choice for you. Don't focus on the big picture. You know what's next, so just do that next thing. It can be so hard to deal with feeling nervous. Now, let me give you another example. I am not at all a fan of, I'm not a singer at all. I do not have a good singing voice. I think the Lord blessed me with all of my musical talent going towards the drumming side, not towards the singing side. So I like singing along with the radio or whatever. It's just, I know that objectively I'm not as talented in the singing world. So I would definitely be nervous about singing in front of other people. And I've had to, I think one time when I was a kid, I had to sing a solo as part of like a kids program at church. And that was the worst thing in the world, having to do that. But even then, I tried to do the same thing. I've always kind of adopted that mentality of, all right, don't think about it. Don't think about the whole big thing. Focus on what's right in front of you. Make sure that you got your costume on, go walk to the right spot in the stage. And then once you're there and the spotlight's on, all you can focus on is hitting the notes and playing the song, doing what you can. So that's kind of how I've handled things all throughout my life. So to you who wrote in and said, have you dealt with anxiety, or what do you do with that? That's what I do. I don't focus on the overall daunting task or what the thing is that I'm nervous about. I focus on just doing the thing right in front of me. So for the example of also, just to wrap up the story, with my illness and going on tour, the same thing. I didn't focus on all the what ifs. I dealt with the situation right in front of me as I went along. So I said, you know what? I'm going to pack my suitcase and pack my drums. I'm going to focus right now in this moment on getting myself out the door into the car with all of my stuff. And then once I'm in the car, I'm going to focus on just getting to where I'm meeting the bus. And then once I'm in the bus, I'm going to focus on getting, just all the way through, take it moment by moment and focus on winning that little battle along the way. It can be really easy to get discouraged if you look at the big picture and think there's so much to do. There's so many small victories you can win along the way, and that's what I focus on, and that's what you should focus on too. So I hope that helped you out with anxiety or nerves or lack of motivation or anything like that. Just put your head down, take the next step, and try not to be fearful. That's the thing. Don't be fearful. As long as you know it's the right choice, move forward with as little or no fear as possible. Thanks for joining me today on Drummer Daily. I can't wait to talk to you, and we will do that again really soon. Bye for now.